Hey guys, this is Mark from zcarguide.com, and this is actually going to be the first video in a series that I've been making on, working on your 240Z's SU carburetors, how they work, and how you can tune and adjust them and rebuild and clean them, and all that stuff. But the first video here is going to be on how these carburetors actually operate, the design principles behind them. How it actually delivers an air-fuel mixture and all the, the technical aspects of it on a kind of like the fundamental level. So it's going to be kind of theoretical, but I do actually have the carburetor here in front of me, as you can see. So, hopefully I'll be able to show you exactly where these things are and help you just kind of understand how these carburetors work on your car. Because I think that's really important in, actually working on them. Actually understanding how they function is a huge component of that. And I'm already too long, but I think I'll try to make this quick for you guys so you can actually get to working on them. So the chart you see to the right here, or the diagram you see, is it's from a book. It's the Haynes Manual to Just the SU Carburetor. I'll link it in the description if you want to get to it. It's some 200 pages on how to actually work on these carburetors and how they function and everything like that. So it's a really good high-level overview, but I'm trying to give the low-level overview so people can actually understand how to work on them. But I think it's helpful to just sort of start matching up components you see in a diagram to the carburetor itself. So obviously this is looking at it from the side, and air is flowing in this way. So this is where air comes in here, because obviously it's a side drive carburetor, so it's running in here and it's flowing in there. So another thing you'll spot right away is this piston right here with the needle is this same piston in here. And I'll move the camera so you can see. But this piston moves up and down. And you can see the needle in there, hopefully. So that's what's kind of dictating the up and down motion. And it does a few other things as well. Actually, it does a whole lot. It's probably the most important thing in the whole carburetor. But next up, you can see that this whole bell housing is all of this right here. And one thing that's really important is this this little rod in here. I guess there's a dampening rod inside of this chamber in here, and that's what's inside of here. It actually connects down, and it goes and slides up and down. Actually, it stays still, but your piston slides up and down. And that thing will ride inside of this rod, or I'm sorry, this little skinny chamber inside of there. And the needle inside of there that I showed you when I lifted it up is really important, and I'm going to briefly explain how. As you can see, this needle goes all the way down into here in a little chamber that connects directly to the float chamber. So that's the float bowl right here. And we'll talk more about that. But the primary function of this needle is because the float level is set such that this chamber will fill up with a decent amount of fuel to right about there. You couldn't really see it before, and this chart doesn't do a super good job of showing you, but this needle is tapered, meaning it gets skinnier as it goes down like that. So at this point it's at the skinniest, and this point it's widest. So when the piston is all the way down right at this level, which actually doesn't happen because no air would be coming in, under normal operation. And even you're not able to go all the way down. There's always going to be a little bit of space underneath there. But at that point, that needle is all the way in there, meaning that it's so wide that little to no fuel could theoretically pass by if it wanted to. Whereas when this piston rises all the way up, maybe this part of the needle is actually right here, meaning the opening. Because it's skinnier on both sides of it or all around it, because that's actually, it's a needle, it's a 3D cylinder, there's a lot more room for fuel to pass by, meaning that your mixture is going to be a whole lot more rich because there's generally a constant level of airflow within here. So that's important because, you would imagine that in times where the engine needs more fuel, this has mechanisms to make sure that the piston has risen at that point, so it delivers the appropriate amount of fuel. And we'll talk a little bit more about how it does that and how it times it correctly. But I just wanted to talk about how important that taper of the needle is. So one thing that you can't see because the carburetor is installed on the engine right now is this butterfly. And that's your throttle butterfly. So when you turn that, when you open up the throttle, it's just opening up that butterfly a little bit to allow more air to flow in actually to the engine. All right, so
at idle conditions, this is pretty much close to shut. In fact, if you looked at it, you would probably say it was completely shut, but there's a little bit of air that's allowed to pass through. And you can see this on some carburetors, like some motorcycle carburetors I think I've seen have little notches in them so that it can completely shut, but that's where, you know, it's always allowing some idle amount of air. With the 240Z, it's just an oval, so it's just always a little bit open, even when it's completely closed. So the next important thing to remember is that on this side, this is where it's connected to the engine. So the cylinder is moving in and up, you know, up and down over here. And it's essentially a large pump, and you can think of it as just pumping air directly out of there, because of the, you know, the revolutions, or I'm sorry, the rising and falling of the cylinder. So as you would imagine, this point right here to the right of the piston, which actually isn't in a whole lot of communication from over here because that like I said, that butterfly is almost shut. This is going to have a very low amount of pressure because it's sucking all of that air out of it, and it's getting close to, you know, a full vacuum. I mean, 100% vacuum is pretty rare in reality. But yeah, right here it's like very low pressure, and it's a pressure differential because over here it's much closer to atmospheric air pressure. So think about what happens when you open up that throttle and the butterfly opens up. So this area of extremely low pressure is allowed to communicate with this side of the carburetor a whole lot more. So air naturally rushes past the jet, like almost violently, to get into this area because, you know, pressure, you know, seeks to equalize in different areas. It wants, you know, wants to be equal across all open areas. Yeah. So next I'm going to be using another chart here. It's from this book, SU Carburetors, Tuning Tips and Techniques. This one's awesome as well. I really recommend this book if you want to understand these carburetors more. So pay attention to this little, this is theoretical again, so it's not always going to look like this, but there's a connection, there's a pressure connection between the top area above the piston and this right here, right next to the butterfly. This actually should be left of the butterfly. So what happens is when you open up that throttle and you get that rushing across like I described just now, the same thing happens up here. Air is going to rush out of here and into the engine. So you're going to have that same depressurization above the piston. Now this below the piston area is connected to more closely connected to atmospheric pressure because the inlet for that is right here. So when the air rushes over here, you're going to see another pressure differential the same way you see across here that causes the rushing of air. You're going to see it inside the piston, and because there's lower pressure above the piston, much more lower than right here, the piston is going to rise, and naturally that needle is going to rise as well. And you know, you can start to see how that impacts the air to fuel ratio because of the needle tapering that I was talking about before. So another thing that I wanted to talk about is how this needle operates and, you know, actually mixes fuel. And I think you need to look back at this chart again to really get an idea of it because it actually shows this little rise at this point where the needle inlet is. So this pipe, you know, it's relatively constant here in terms of width, and then it shrinks. There's a constriction in the pipe, meaning that area where air has to flow through gets skinnier as it gets to this point. Now, if anyone's, you know, studied physics, might remember that has some significance in pressure, and it's a principle called the Venturi Effect. I don't know if it's a principle or whatever the proper terminology is, but what it says is when you have that situation where air is flowing through a pipe and it features a constriction like that, the fluid pressure reduces, and also velocity, you know, will increase. But that makes sense because it has to continue flowing and it has to go somewhere, so the velocity there increases. But most importantly, the pressure in this area right here is far less than right over here, and it's enough to this pressure, this vacuum of sorts right here, this little bubble of low pressure causes this fuel to fly out and try to equalize that pressure. So, you know, it's very small amounts, and that's why it creates a vapor, because it's, you know, very small amounts of fuel, like fuel droplets basically, you know, even smaller than that, and air is mixing with it. So this fuel is flying out of here because of that effect, and then it's mixing with the air. So at this point, it's a mixture. It's a gaseous mixture. It's a mixture of fuel and air.
You know, and like we said, how much fuel is determined by where that needle is, because the same amount of airflow is always going to be across, but if it's higher up and meaning more fuel is allowed to flow out at that Venturi point, it's going to be a richer mixture, meaning there's going to be more parts of fuel than there are parts of air. So yeah, I thought that was pretty important. But if you study carburetors at all, you'd probably have already seen something like that. So that's all I really wanted to talk about. I kind of wanted to make it brief and only talk about the you know, the most overarching concepts that that really dictate the operation of this carburetor. You know, if you're planning on following the rest of this guide on you know, removing the carburetors, rebuilding and cleaning them, and reinstalling them, and then tuning them, you'll definitely learn a lot more. But I think you know, it's a good idea to have this fundamental overview initially. You know, if you wish to really start to understand it more. But I would definitely understand if this level of information is not enough. So I'm going to leave a description of these two books and then another book that I used to, you know, I read through them to sort of understand these carburetors better. At this point, I think that's a good overview that will help you if you're going to do any kind of work on these carburetors. So thanks for watching.